relationship. Nereus stands silent and motionless, and the servants rush to tell him that the princess is in front of him. However, the guest laughs at Dorothea for not knowing how to control spirits. In the royal family of Pons, the power of the spirit of water is passed down from generation to generation, with which they still maintain a close connection. Nereus does not agree to call someone a princess who does not know how to handle spirits and could not even enter the epistemium. Dorothea tells him that she did not go there of her own free will, and not because she could not. With her diplomatic behavior, she proves that she is much more educated than Nereus, although she does not study in epistemia. They look into each other's eyes with flaring hatred, without interrupting the verbal skirmish. Sitting over a cup of tea, Dorothea, without losing her dignity, reveals to Nereus all her scientific knowledge. Not to be outdone, he remembers that military affairs is also studied in epistemia. Then Dorothy, in a calm tone, invites him to compete with swords and asks him to behave politely if she wins. Nereus was absolutely confident of his victory, but almost immediately after the start of the battle, Dorothea disarmed him. The princess mocks his abilities, because it was the first time she picked up a sword after removing the cast, but even so he could not defeat her. Angry, Nereus summons the spirit of water, and Dorothea is whirled around in a strong whirlpool in front of the frightened servants. Because of the water, it becomes difficult for the princess to breathe, and she is scared to realize that due to her inability to summon spirits, Ubera may soon be absorbed by Hark. Having gained strength from the anger overwhelming her, Dorothy raises her sword and cuts the water with a flourish. Nereus cannot believe his eyes, because the princess was able to resist the spirit without having any abilities. Dorothea assures Clara and Stefan, who have run up, that she is fine and gets back on her feet. Approaching Nereus with a confident step, she demands to raise the sword again to continue the fight. He justifies himself by saying that the powers of the spirit are also one of the ways of fighting, but Dorothea is not against Nereus using powers. She is confident in herself, and the very next moment she disarms him again and puts the sword to his neck. Sitting in the room combing her hair, the princess reassures the worried Clara that she is all right. However, unpleasant thoughts are spinning in her head. She does not understand why she needed this victory. Does she really want to go over her head again? A worried Adin enters the room, having apparently found out about what happened. Dorothea assures him that everything is fine, but she can't stop thinking that because of the water spirit, Ubera will be absorbed by Hark. Aiden is worried because the princess always says that everything is fine, but her face says that everything is completely wrong. To somehow entertain Dorothy, the boy invites her to play the violin for her, and everyone is delighted with his talent. Suddenly, the game is interrupted by a knock on the door, and the princess, recognizing the voice of Nereus in the newcomer, jumps up from her seat. Grabbing Eden by the hand, she hides him behind the curtain and orders him not to move, because he promised not to meet with pawns. Without waiting for an invitation and pushing away Clara, who came out to meet her, Nereus unceremoniously enters Dorothea's room. Having examined her, he notices that she is not injured, and the princess orders him to briefly explain to her the purpose of his visit. Nereus apologizes for using his power on an ordinary person who cannot control spirits, and Dorothy, barely able to contain herself, accepts the apology and asks him to leave. The uninvited guest conveys to the princess an invitation from his father to attend the evening meal, where the Duke of Bronte will also be present. Dorothea doesn't want to go, but it's rude to decline the king's invitation, so she tells Clara to prepare everything she needs to go. Nereus asks who played the violin before he arrived, but Dorothy claims that he heard it and hurries out. Pong glances at Stefan standing motionless by the curtain, who promises to catch up with them as soon as he finishes with his business. Sitting at a table with guests, King Harka tries to defuse the situation after an incident between his son and the princess. He hopes for Dorothea's understanding, and notices that she is becoming more and more like Empress Alice. The princess saw a portrait of her mother, who belonged to one of the branches of Fried, and she liked the woman in the portrait. Leaving the estate, Dorothy is indignant at the words of the king, who hinted that the princess was not invited to the capital, even though she had recovered. Suddenly, she remembers the food that Joy brought her every month, and learns that she has not heard from him for 2 months. And at this very moment, when she remembers him and wonders if something has happened, he flies up to the princess. Stefan pushes the arrogant boy away from Dorothea, but he does not give up and demands to talk to the princess. He falls to his knees in front of her and asks for help, because she promised that she would help if he ever had to sell his life. Sitting in the princess's carriage, Joy tells her that his father owes money to the mayor, and now he and his younger brother will be taken to the mine. Fearing for the boy's life, the princess agrees to help the children, but in return demands that they fulfill one condition. Dorothea visits the mayor and gives him a chest full of gold bars. The man claims that there is much more in the chest than the debt. Dorothea asks that the money be used to pay off the debts of all the children working in the mine and that no more child labor be used. Before her rebirth, when she introduced a law banning child labor, she was much criticized. Now she is not an empress and has no right to do this, but she hopes that she could help at least someone. Joy is surprised that the princess is going to go with him after his brother. Taking Stefan with them, they all set off together because it is unknown what could happen. Dorothea looks around in horror, looking at a poor area that she has never been to before. People around looked at the arrivals with interest, because even in simple clothes, the girl did not look like a poor woman. The princess is surprised how people can live in a house built from only slanted boards. Opening the door, they see a frightened boy sitting on the floor, Joey's brother Po. Upon learning that they are leaving this house, the child joyfully rushes into the arms of his older brother. Joy tells her brother that they are leaving their father and tells Po to say hello to the princess. Dorothy smiles tenderly at the emaciated boy, who looks at her with large green eyes. At this moment, screams are heard. Po fearfully rushes to his older brother, and Dorothy turns around towards the screams. A shabby, toothless man stands in the doorway, yelling at Stefan and demanding that the uninvited guests get out of his house. Dorothea is angry at the man who is going to sell his children to the mine, and she reveals that she is taking them with her. Grabbing Joy's hand, she hurriedly leads them behind her, away from this scoundrel. Returning to the estate, Dorothy ordered the children to be washed and changed. The princess reminds the rejoicing children that she ransomed them, and in return for paying off the debt, they must work for her. She states that they should follow her as she has work for them. The boys are brought to the dining room, where a rich table is set, decorated with flowers. The children stand rooted to the spot, because for the first time in their lives, they see such splendor, and the princess orders them to sit down. A variety of dishes are brought to the table, which makes the boys' eyes widen. Dorothea plans to teach them table etiquette so that Joy and Po can serve her. Joy is a little scared. He doesn't know what to expect from the princess, because she might turn out to be just like Earl Duncan and make him do hard work. However, looking closely at Dorothea's calm face, he still decides that she is kind. Smiling, Joy tells the princess about her favorite dish, apple pie, and promises to someday give it to her as a token of gratitude. Returning to learning etiquette, the children eat everything on their plates and thank the princess. Suddenly, the door to the dining room opens, and a servant brings in dessert under a silver squash. It turned out to be an apple pie, which the princess asked to bring to the children for their efforts in learning etiquette. However, Joy becomes upset, both embarrassed by Dorothy's kindness and saddened by the fact that he wanted to give her the pie first. The princess reassures him and tells him that the people who work for her must be neat and healthy, so now their task is to eat well and become healthier. Dorothea wrote about all this in her letter to Theon, reading which he bursts into a smile from her kindness. He sits down at the table and reaches out to the ink to quickly answer the letter. However, the hand does not obey. It trembles, the heart beats wildly, and Theon's body ceases to obey. He is scared, not understanding what is wrong with him. Eden came to visit the princess. Clara accompanies him to the whispers of the maids touched by his beauty. Walking down the corridor, he hears the voice of Dorothea, who scolds someone for hiding a pie in the room. Opening the door, Eden sees Dorothea taking away a moldy pie from two boys, which they regret throwing away. Having learned from Clara where these children came from, Eden greets the princess and admires her action. Dorothea leaves the room, and Joy and Po are left alone with him, recognizing him because he was present at the swordsman's competition. The boys talk about Dorothea's kindness and how they are learning letters and history at the castle. Eden expresses his dissatisfaction with the fact that the children stuck to the princess like parasites. Joey claims that he's not one to sit around doing nothing. He just doesn't know how he can repay Dorothy. Good-naturedly placing his hand on the boy's shoulder, Eden shares an idea he has about this. Dorothea is sitting in the guest room sipping tea with Eden when a confused Joy and Po appear on the doorstep. They take out from behind their backs a basket of berries that they collected to please the princess. The girl accepts the gift embarrassedly. She didn't force the boys to work, but she is pleased that they took care of her. Suddenly, Dorothy notices that the basket is lined with Theon's handkerchief, which is all smeared in berry juice. The princess is angry. She scolds the boys for taking someone else's thing without asking, because this scarf means so much to her. Out of fear, Po begins to cry and tells Dorothea that it was Eden's idea to bring her sweets. Joey is angry because Eden told him to put something under the berries, but he claims that he didn't think they would take Dorothy's thing. The princess asks the boys to go out for a while, and as she leaves, Joy casts an angry glance at a grinning Eden. However, as soon as the door slams, Dorothea slaps Eden in the face. She looks him straight in the eye and understands perfectly what really happened. Eden makes a surprised face, but Dorothy suddenly realizes that they are both the same as before. She was going to change Eden in the right direction, but she can't even control herself. Before his rebirth, he had a hobby of secretly throwing his things and enjoying superiority when noble ladies bowed before him to pick up the dropped thing. Among them were those who kept his scarves, and he, watching this, laughed at them. Dorothea was the first to find out about this hobby of his, and this became the beginning of their common sin. Their anger was too closely intertwined, the tyrant who ascended the throne and her right hand, who pushed her to do so. All this then took root and eventually bore fruit, leading to the murder of Raymond. She tried to convince her friend Theon, who was crying over the corpse, that she was now the Empress. She convinced him that now he would sit on the throne next to the Empress. However, people opposed the fact that a person who did not control the spirit and killed his loved ones would be on the throne. She killed everyone who opposed her, but contrary to expectations, Theon declared her madness. Since the day of Raymond's murder, she had been tormented by insomnia every day. She was worried that people continued to hate her. However, Eden, who was always nearby, convinced her that people were mired in prejudices. Theon turned his back on Dorothea, but Eden swore that he would always be there and take care of her. Theon continued to correspond with Julia, and his face always lit up with a smile when he received a new letter. Dorothea trembled with anger because she had much more than Julia, but Theon never smiled at her. She even decided to build a new palace for Theon to earn his favor. However, this did not help either. Dorothea learned that Theon considered her pathetic and terrible. She then became so angry that, deciding that the only thing beautiful about her was her jewelry, she tore out the earring in anger, tearing her ear. Eden, who arrived in time, saw in horror the bleeding ear and hurried to help Dorothea. At that moment, it was reported that Theon wanted to see the Empress, and she turned around with the hope that he had finally come to her with love. However, Theon was angry. He learned that Dorothea had revoked the title of the de Leving family and banned them from appearing in the capital. Dorothea asked her husband to stop being interested in Julia, and Eden silently watched the scene. Having heard from the enraged Theon how much Julia meant to him, Dorothea slapped him in the face. Stating that he never swore that he would belong to her, Theon turned and walked out, with Dorothy rushing after him. However, Eden stopped her, convincing her that she would only hurt her husband's feelings, and she needed to wait a little. Holding Dorothea close to him, he promised that one day everything she wanted so much would definitely come into her arms. The Empress gave Theon everything she had, however. The more she gave, the stronger his indifference became. One day, when Dorothea was once again thinking about how to win Theon, Eden came to her. He arrived to report that Julia was dead, having suffered an accident while wandering alone without protection. Dorothea thought that perhaps it was Eden who killed Julia for her, but she didn't care. She was already rushing to Theon, because now there was no barrier between them. The Empress found her husband in the garden. He lowered his head and held a dead bird in his hands. With tears in his eyes, he turned to Dorothea and asked if she still loved him. Kneeling down in front of her husband, Dorothy replied that she continued to love him. Dorothea, with tears in her eyes, convinced Theon that she was not involved in Julia's murder. Grabbing the Empress by the hands, Theon told her that her greed had ruined him. After some time, he committed suicide, and his shadow began to haunt Dorothea, and she could not do her work properly. In the end, the Empress, who turned the country into chaos and killed a huge number of people, was sentenced to death. Before her execution, Eden approached Dorothea to ask her about her last words. Kneeling down on one knee in front of her, he wanted her to ask him for salvation. However, Dorothea refused, because her life without Theon no longer had any meaning. Eden was furious. He could not understand what was so bad about Theon that even in the face of death the Empress could not forget about him. Dorothea just smiled and asked Eden to become a good hero, because all this time she had only succeeded in the role of a villain. Looking at her silently, Eden pulled a crystal from his wand and handed it to the Empress, but she turned away. The next moment, an axe flashed over Dorothea's head, and the Empress was beheaded. She died with the thought that no one in the whole world loved her, and if she had known that this would happen, she would have ended it all earlier. Now Dorothea stands, clenching her fist, trembling, and does not understand why all these memories visited her right now. However, she knows one thing for sure. She and Eden are very similar, so they can only make each other worse. Being close to Eden, Dorothea is afraid to succumb to greed again and take the path of evil. Eden apologizes for being wrong and hugs the princess tightly, preventing her from leaving. He asks her to stop crying, but tears flow from his eyes. Dorothea pushes him away. She thinks that apologies are also a mask, because in his past life he never apologized. Eden regrets what he did, because he committed this act out of jealousy, wanting to be the princess's only friend. He is afraid that if Dorothea is friends with others, he will be left alone, but the princess does not know how much to trust his words. The emperor is informed of the successful visit of the delegation from Kark to Cerithian, and how impressed they were with the princess. The speaker also reports on Dorothea's successes in fighting infection, charitable donations, and the development of her mind. The emperor learns that the princess has already recovered sufficiently, and even took part in a fencing competition. Karnan orders Dorothea to be returned to the palace and decides to send her to the entrance exams for epistemia. He believes that the exam will allow him to understand whether the princess is really as smart as they say she is. Stefan sits in the garden, polishing his sword, and thinking about the years he spent in Cerithian next to the princess. He remembers his first meeting with Dorothy, when he and the other knights discovered her in the desert. Meeting the princess again at the estate, she did not recognize him, but he clearly remembered how her thin arms clung to him in the desert. Therefore, when they officially met, he did not dare to shake her hands, fearing that those thin palms would break from shaking hands. When the princess first asked to teach her how to wield a sword, Stefan was delighted, because now he was not practicing alone. Moreover, when the knight saw how well the princess trained, he understood the joy of mentoring. Stefan considered Dorothea a smart, persistent, strong girl, as if blessed by God, whom one could not help but love. However, one day the princess told him about her nightmares, and Stefan realized that the fate of this girl would never be worthy of love, since she was born by killing her own mother. Empress Alice bled to death while giving birth to Dorothy. The doctor was barely able to save the child, dying in a sea of blood, but they say that in the end his head was cut off. Stefan doesn't understand who could tell Dorothy about this, who didn't need to know about everything, because now she's tormented by guilt. The knight regrets that he is not as sweet and open as Clara, and it is difficult for him to speak words of encouragement to the princess. Suddenly, a rustling is heard behind the bushes. Stefan gets up and sees Joey, who has fallen from fright. The boy sits next to him and asks about how Stefan became a knight. Joy would also like to become a knight, but he believes that he will not succeed because he is not from a noble family. Stefan sadly listens to the boy, thinking about something of his own, and asks him if he really wants to become a knight. Joy enthusiastically convinces Stefan of his desire, because he believes that it is cooler to die fighting the enemy than from labor in the mine. In addition, the boy believes that if he becomes a knight, he will be able to repay his debt to the princess, because she saved him. And now, Stefan is already telling Dorothea about his desire to teach Joy and asking her permission. Having received consent, Stefan asks the princess whether she will continue to engage in fencing. However, Dorothy believes that it is dangerous for her to become stronger, because holding a sword in her hands, she is overcome by the desire to win and capture. Clenching her fists and not looking Stefan in the eyes, she refuses to continue training under the pretext that she is bored. The knight sadly sees off the girl, who hastily left the room. The chef scolds Poe for hanging around the kitchen, because if the boy is hungry, all he has to do is ask. However, Poe is not hungry. He wants something else. However, he is too shy and embarrassed to ask. The chef leans over the boy to whisper his idea in his ear. The boss praises the joyful Poe for what he said and promises to help him as much as necessary. Eden lies on the bed in his room and cries, saddened that the princess is angry with him and refuses him admission. He wants to do something that will make Dorothy happy, and suddenly a wonderful thought occurs to him. There are flowers in Cerithian that shine in the night, but there are no such flowers in other places, and people often come to find them. Eden decides to go